Hey everybody, I want to welcome you here to Zion United Church of Christ. I'm Pastor Scott Davis, and I'm here to just share a little bit about a trip that my wife Jennifer and I took to Israel. We had a wonderful time. Now we flew out of Newark, New Jersey, right outside of New York City, and we flew to Tel Aviv, which is about a 5,700, 5,800 mile flight. On the way over, it was 10 hours. On the way back, it was 12. We came into Tel Aviv, which is a modern city. The airport is in a little town called Lud, which is about 8 miles just south of Tel Aviv. And after we flew in and went through all the COVID screening, we drove down to Jerusalem, which is about 40 or 50 miles. So for a Michigan context, think Mount Clemens to Port Huron, or perhaps maybe Detroit to Toledo. I mean, it's very, very close. So we were in Israel. Israel itself is about the size of New Jersey. Lebanon, its neighbor to the north, is the size of the state of Rhode Island. Everything there in this ancient land was also very modern and beautiful and wonderful. When we came in for our trip, it was supposed to be 12 days, but because of COVID, it wound up being 11. We spent the first few days down in Jerusalem, then we were up to Nazareth. Jerusalem to Nazareth is about 90 miles, so figure Detroit to East Lansing. And then after a couple days up in Nazareth, going to the Sea of Galilee, which is about the size of Lake St. Clair, we went back down to Jerusalem after 3 days. So here's the Sea of Galilee, here's the Jordan River, here is the Dead Sea, and this works its way down here, and you come down to the Red Sea. This is Israel proper. This area here, where Jerusalem is, and Bethlehem and Jericho, this is the West Bank. It's called the West Bank because it's west of the Jordan River. East of the Jordan River is the country of Jordan. There's a lot of history in this country between the religions and the different groups. We want to talk primarily this morning about the places we saw. So the first place when we came in, after this 10-hour flight, the very first place we came in, you'll see this video up, this picture up in the video now, we had this Welcome to Israel shot. A girl holding up the Israeli flag, and it says, Welcome to Israel, in Hebrew and also in Arabic. And all the people we met, whether Palestinian or Israeli Jewish, regardless of religion or background, everybody spoke English as well as you or I did. Which was amazing. And the people were all wonderful and beautiful and so welcoming. It's been a hard time for them during the COVID time, but we were so glad to be there. Our second shot is a picture of St. George's Anglican Cathedral. It's a cathedral run by the Anglican Church, and the gentleman who's the Archbishop there, a Palestinian gentleman who's originally from Nazareth. He's an Arab Israeli gentleman in his 40s, wonderful, wonderful man. Very gracious and welcoming, and we had a wonderful time with him. And so we stayed in St. George's guest house when we were in Jerusalem. Now I want to move along to our pictures of Hebrew University, which is in the city of Jerusalem, and it overlooks Jerusalem. The first picture here is a picture of Jennifer and I on a sunny day. The weather there in middle of January, during the day it was in the low 50s, and at nighttime it was high 30s. So it's not kind of like our March in Michigan, but we had so many beautiful days. It's the first picture of myself with my lovely bride at Hebrew University. The second picture is at Hebrew University, and you have this big, wonderful, beautiful tree. And the gentleman who's there with his back to us is Father Chris Yaw, who's a pastor of St. David's Episcopal Church here in Southfield, Michigan. Wonderful gentleman. And this photo, just to give you a picture or a sense of how big this tree is, he's about 6'5", so this is a big, big tree. Moving along, we have a picture of the modern city of Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem itself, the land area, I find this interesting, and maybe it's a nerdy thing, but the city of Jerusalem is probably about the same land area as Clinton Township and Mount Clemens. Clinton Township and Mount Clemens together maybe have 120,000 people. Jerusalem has 850,000 people in the city proper, so people are packed in pretty tight. Moving along from the picture of the Jerusalem landscape there, the next day we went to Herod's Palace. This first picture is a picture of ruins of Herod's Palace. This was an archaeological dig up until about 20 years ago or so. This is about 4 miles outside of the city of Jerusalem. And moving along, you see the turret of Herod's palace. This again is 4 miles outside of Jerusalem. It's built up into a hill. It's also significant because it's only about 3 miles from Bethlehem. Bethlehem is very, very close to Jerusalem. Most biblical scholars believe this was actually the palace, 4 miles outside of Jerusalem, 3 miles from Bethlehem, where the wise men would have visited. I now want to show you a picture of the old city of Jerusalem. This would have been the city of David. It's a city that's divided into 4 historic quarters. There's a Jewish quarter, a Muslim quarter, a Christian quarter, and an Armenian quarter. Now the Armenian people are Christians, and it's one of the oldest Christian denominations in the world. This first shot is just a picture of a street light and 2 men walking down the street in, I think this is the Armenian quarter here where they are. And you can see a car there as well. The second picture, you have this barbed wire, but we're up on top of the ramparts. The ramparts go around the whole city, and for $10 you can pay to take a tour. It's a self-directed tour, and you get to walk up and walk along the ramparts, and you can see all different quarters within the city. So here's a picture with Jennifer and I were on top of the ramparts. The second one is also from the ramparts, and you can see these people have their HVAC unit right next to a Christmas tree, a giant Christmas tree that's on top of the ramparts. Moving along, you have a picture of me on top of the ramparts, and in the back, over in the Muslim quarter, you can see a picture of the Dome of the Rock. If you take a look at that. There I have my new sunglasses on, trying to look all cool, but in the back you can see the Dome of the Rock. This picture was taken in the Christian quarter, looking over at the Muslim quarter. Now moving along from the old city, I want to go to Judean Hills. If you look at the map, here's the city of Jerusalem, the beginning of the West Bank, and then you have the road between Jerusalem and Jericho, and you have the Judean Hills. This was the ancient kingdom of Judah. So the road between Jerusalem and Jericho is probably, if you drive it today, the modern highway, it's probably 35 minutes or so on the highway. And I would say it's probably maybe a 40 mile drive. But this first photo, we have pictures of people's houses in the Judean Hills. This next picture is a picture of the sun coming up over the Judean Hills. Very rugged, beautiful country. It reminded me a lot of the American Southwest. We had one person on the trip who said it reminded her quite a bit of the Badlands. It was just kind of eerie and beautiful and gorgeous. I thought of it as being a very thin place, one of those places where we're here on earth where you can almost like touch God. I know I'm not trying to sound too new agey now, but it was a very, very thin, liminal kind of place. If you look at our next photo, there's a picture of Jennifer and I with the Judean Hills in the background. I think this might be a Christmas picture. We're working on that though. We went out there the first day, and as the sun was coming up, we had communion. Our next photo, there's another photo of the Judean Hills, just wild and beautiful. And again, this is only maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes outside of that city of 850,000 people. The landscape in Israel changes so very quickly. You go from the Judean Hills and you go up north to the lush green of Nazareth. It's just wonderful. This next photo is, you can see some green and the pathway and the sun coming up. This was also in this place, looking at the Judean Hills. And next we went up north to Nazareth. So we left Jerusalem after a couple days. Jerusalem's here, and we went up into north, into Israel proper again. It's about 90 miles between Jerusalem and Nazareth. Nazareth is a city of about 80 to 100,000 people, and it's built in the hills. And for us of us in Michigan, you kind of think of a city about the size of Warren, but it's built into these hills, very, very hilly. This first photo in the Greek Orthodox Church is of the eternal light over the spot where the Greek Orthodox people believe Gabriel visited Mary. Our next photo is of the interior of the Church of the Annunciation, and you'll notice in front of each picture, in front of each icon telling the story of the Annunciation, we have these eternal lights. In fact, the one that is second from the right in my photo is, you can see the angel Gabriel there visiting Mary, and you have candles that you can light in front of that. Just a gorgeous, gorgeous church. There's a picture of a pulpit in the Annunciation Church. It's just richly adorned and telling the story again of Gabriel visiting Mary. After our time in Nazareth, which was a fun, smallish, for us, small city, about 100,000 people, we went 4 miles away to Cepherus. We went to Cepherus for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was the ancient capital of Galilee. Number two, it's where Jesus' mother Mary grew up. It's also probably where Jesus would have gone with his earthly father Joseph. They would have walked the 4 or 5 miles from Nazareth down into Cepherus for work, and that's where Jesus would have learned how to be a carpenter. And so we walked on some of these. You're going to see this in the next photo, or one of the next photos. We walked on these ancient Roman roads that were at least 2,000 years old, and it was really a moving experience to walk on a road, and how they think about to walk on a road that Jesus walked on. And there were fewer potholes than what we experience today. Next photo after the Roman road is the ancient theater at Cepherus. It's partially reconstructed, but part of it is also original. And they figured that it's a theater that could sit about 4,000 people. They would have built a theater about 1/10 the size of the total population. So if you have a theater in one of these ancient cities that seats 4,000, that means the town had about 40,000 people in it. This is one of the buildings at Cepherus, and I want you to take a look at this picture. At the bottom of these very giant stones, these would have been dated to the Roman times, to the time when Jesus was there. Just above that, the stones are a little smaller. That would have been dated to the time of Emperor Constantine, like 340, 350 AD, and his mother, St. Helena. Just above those stones, the stones as you go up get smaller, would have been the stones from the Crusader period, so like 1000 AD to 1100 AD. At the very top of the photo, these very smaller stones would have been from the Ottoman period. The Ottoman Empire would have been from 1400s up till the end of World War I. In America, if we don't like where we are, we just go west. We have a frontier, we have other places we can go, we can build new. Space is at a premium here. People build on top. Moving on here, in this ancient town of Cepherus, the ancient capital of Galilee, we have the remains that have been reconstructed of the ancient synagogue that was there at that time. Jesus may have known this synagogue. And if you go to the next photo, you're going to see the plaque. This display structure, the ancient synagogue at Zappori National Park, Cepherus, and the enhancement of the display were made possible through the generosity of Alfred and Bernice Deutsch of Detroit, Michigan. Yay, go blue, go green, go white. Also now we want to look at some pictures of up in Galilee, outside of Nazareth. Here's the Sea of Galilee. Here's Nazareth, where we were. Here's Haifa, off in the distance from Cepherus, about 40, 50 miles. That's a modern city, up in the north of the country before you get to Lebanon. Nazareth, here's the Sea of Galilee, which is the size of Lake St. Clair. This first photo is a picture of the Sea of Galilee that's looking across over into Jordan, actually. Just beautiful with the palm trees. Another photo there in Galilee. Just lush green country. Very, very different than being down south with the Judean Hills here. It's lush and green, and you go from desert to lush green lakes in a very short distance. Next, after Galilee, we were up in the Golan Heights, which was originally part of Syria. And if you see in this first photo, Jennifer and I, this was we were up in the Golan Heights, and it had snowed like the day before. So they had an inch of snow, which means all the schools were canceled, and the kids got to go outside and play in the snow. The second photo, we're in Israel, but we're looking right across the way there into Syria. I mean, we're right up on the Syrian border. And there I am eating a shish kebab. Wonderful hummus, wonderful baba ganoush, bread. The food was so fresh, the people were so hospitable and kind. Moving along, when we left this little Druze village of Masada, we went up to ancient Caesarea Philippi. This first picture you see with the water and the wall there, the stone wall, this is the beginning of three rivers, the River Hermon and the River Jordan, and I forget the name of the third river to tell you the truth. But behind it, you'll see these wonderful pictures of rock and of stone, Caesarea Philippi. The second photo has pictures. You can see where people have carved into the rock from ancient times. This is where the worship of the god Pan would have gone on, and human sacrifices would have gone on here. After that, after our time up in the Golan Heights, we went all the way back down south. So we came back down and we went down to Jericho, which is a city that's 10,000 years old. The next photo, you have a palm tree here in Jericho, and you have, off in the distance, you have Jordan. Going down from Jericho, we went down to the Dead Sea. And I got a couple photos down to the Dead Sea. We left here, and we went down to the Dead Sea. where we floated, which is what you do. And it's the strangest feeling. You're like, oh, I'm going to sink, but you get in and then you pop up because of the salt content in the water. Here's the first photo of the Dead Sea, and looking across that land on the other side is Jordan. And there's a picture of me. I probably hadn't shaved that day. You can see there's the Dead Sea in the background. The Dead Sea is losing 2 meters in depth every year. They showed us where it was dry land, where just a few years ago, had been sea. After the Dead Sea, we went literally right across the street to Qumran. Qumran is where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. In 1948, there was, I think, a shepherd who came across the Dead Sea Scrolls in a cave. What that was, when he came across these scrolls, he found a copy of the book of Isaiah, which turned out to be 700 years older than what we had at that time in 1948. And here's a picture of a menorah looking out at the Dead Sea. This next photo that looks like Star Wars, these are the caves at Qumran, where a lot of times the people would have lived, or they would have gone to pray, and then they would have come down out of the caves, and they had the ruins there of like basically little houses where people would have lived. Now I want to move on to our time when we went to Bethlehem. You can't really see it on the map, but Bethlehem is only like 5 miles from downtown Jerusalem. It's very, very close. This first photo is when we were in a little town called Bet-Sahur. Bet-Sahur is literally right next to Bethlehem. Bet-Sahur is the shepherd's fields, where the shepherds would have been keeping watch over their flocks by night. And you can tell that there's hills. The next photo is a cave at Bet-Sahur, Bet-Sahur being right next to Bethlehem. People would have lived in these caves. So you had a stone that was rolled in front of your cave. You would roll the stone out of the way. And here you would have had one part of the cave where your animals would have slept. And right next to it, you would have had a part of the cave where you would have slept with your wife and your kids. Now we come into the city of Bethlehem, which is right down the street. And this is the wall built around Bethlehem that separates Bethlehem from Israel, from the rest of Israel. The highways too, there's also a situation there. If you're an Israeli citizen, whether Arab or Jewish, you can drive on certain highways, but if you're in the West Bank, which would be mostly Palestinian folks, they can not drive on certain roads. I mean, there's a separation between Israelis and Palestinians, and there's a whole history there. We can't get into all of it today. I don't want to do it any injustice, but this is just a picture of the wall outside of Bethlehem. And this is inside the city of Bethlehem. There's 2 guys on the street. If you look in the background, there's a Square Bucks, kind of like Starbucks. It's kind of a cute little thing. And then there was Stars and Bucks Cafe, which is kind of like Starbucks. I don't know about copyright infringement. And then I took a picture of this guy, Schott's liquor store. I don't know, it struck me as funny that they had this in Bethlehem. The next picture, okay, finally to a religious picture. This is inside the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. And this is where it's believed that Mary gave birth to Jesus. And this here, why did you take a picture of a grate? This is in the Catholic part of the church, and this grate basically goes over the basement apartment of St. Jerome. Now, who's St. Jerome? St. Jerome is the one who translated the Christian Bible from Greek into Latin. He gave us the Latin Vulgate. This is where he would have done it. This is where he translated that. Going on here, this is the Greek Orthodox part of the Church of the Nativity. In the back part there, you can see the door of humility, which we all could use. It's a little door that you enter. To enter the church, you have to stoop down. We'll see that in a couple of frames. Again, this is the Greek Orthodox altar, right next to the Catholic part. Underneath this Greek Orthodox altar is where I went down in the basement, essentially, and touched where the manger would have been. There's the door of humility. You can see that man outside. That's in the square. You stoop down and you walk through this door. You come into the narthex, which is the entry point to the Greek Orthodox Church, and then you go into where we just were by the altar. You come down and you show your humility, like Jesus was humble. You have to stoop down to come into the church. Yes, the next I want to talk about the Mount of Olives. This is again back in leaving Bethlehem. We're back in Jerusalem. This first picture, this here, we're at a Catholic church on the Mount of Olives, and right in front of us, that's the Garden of Gethsemane. Literally right in front of us. Now these olive trees are not, they're probably only 500 or 600 years old, but there have been olive trees there for thousands of years. And this is much how it would have looked in the time when Jesus was arrested. Now you think the wall, the city's right there, so when they came to arrest Jesus, they literally went across the street, they got him in the guard and they arrested him, and they brought him back over. It's right there. It's literally across the street. Here again, you see a picture of the Garden of Gethsemane, and there's a little, you'll see in the picture, a little a rock sculpture that says peace, which I thought was kind of cool, so I took a picture of that. This is now moving along. At the top of Mount of Olives itself is, as you go up it, there's different little villages right across from the old city. And it's a pretty good sized hills. But as you go up to the top of the Mount of Olives, if you remember on Palm Sundays, the little town of Bethpage and Bethany. But in this picture, you'll see Jesus riding the donkey. This would have been, you go to Bethpage and Bethany, you get the donkey, tell them I need the donkey, the Lord needs it. Jesus would have gone on the donkey here, and he would have gone down the hill into the old city. And this church commemorates that in this little town. And this is a picture of the stone, which they say would have been the stone that he got the donkey from. Whether or not this was the actual stone, that doesn't really matter to me too much. It was just incredible to be in the village or in the place where these things actually did happen and are verified by other sources outside of the Holy Scriptures. Again, on the Mount of Olives, we're looking at the old city here. And in this picture, we can see the new city. We can see the old city with the Dome of the Rock behind the wall. And we also have a Jewish cemetery right here on the Mount of Olives. And in the foreground here, you can see where people are going to be buried in this Jewish cemetery because folks believe this is where the resurrection will occur. We'll be here on the Mount of Olives. On the Mount of Olives, we went to this Catholic church, which was built in 1982 by people from Rye, New York, which is a suburb of New York City. The rooster refers to, Peter, before you deny me, the cock will crow. They built this church here on the Mount of Olives. And here, we're inside this church, beautiful church, and you're going to say, well, we're right by the altar with our group, and you're going to say, well, what's the hole in the floor? They believe that this area is where Jesus was scourged, where he was beaten. Underneath it would have been the dungeon. So they would have tied, if you imagine, they tie the prisoner up with leather straps. They beat him, beat the heck out of the poor guy, leave him up halfway to be dead. Then they take salt from the stone trough and rub the salt into the wounds, and then they would have lowered you into the pit. The Bible talks again about being lowered into the pit. That's what they would have done in this dungeon. This was, with all the different things we saw, and the street vendors, and some of the things were very kitschy, as you might imagine. This caught me unaware. This moved me very, very much. When we went down we saw where they would have beaten him, and then we went down into the cave and thought about him being lowered down into the cave. This really touched me in the moment. This next photo, you see the picture of my hand touching the inside of the cave. It was a very moving time because we went down and we read from the Psalms about being lowered into the pit, and it was a very touching moment. So it moved me when I was down there, and we were down there as a group. And there's me reading at the bottom of the cave. This is right underneath the altar of the church. Next, I want to bring you across the street to the old city. Now, this first photo, we see Jewish men going up to the western wall, and in the lower part of the photo, you can see there's a little shul or synagogue in there where men can go and pray. So this is the western wall. This is the remnant of the temple. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD or 70 CE, and as part of that war, when the Jews rebelled against Rome, the Romans won, obviously, and they destroyed everything. They destroyed most of the temple. They left the western wall. So this part of the western wall where we went, this is where the men went, and then the women had another part where they could go. But this is just a cultural and a religious thing with Judaism and Islam in that part of the world. And so, you respect what people do. And the wall has cracks in it, so you can write the names of people or prayer intentions on it. You go up to the wall and you put the prayers in there, which I did. When I went up there, I wrote a prayer for different names of friends and so forth. And then I wrote some of my friends' names, and I wrote a prayer for the Detroit Lions, and I put that in there too. So I figured it can't hurt. Okay, this is a photo of a bridge. Like, what is this bridge? So you go up this bridge, and you come out on the other side, which is where the Dome of the Rock is. The Dome of the Rock, again, is where Muslim people believe that Muhammad began his journey up into the heavens and then came down in Mecca. This is the third holiest site in all of Islam. Just absolutely breathtaking, beautiful. And there's one of our travelers. This is right next to the dome by the arch, and I just got a shot of her there. It's a big, big plaza, gorgeous place. Now I want to take you back into another part of the old city, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is where we believe that Jesus would have been buried. Here we are. Okay, Via Dolorosa. You got it right there on this old building. The Via Dolorosa is the Road of Sorrows. This is when we speak of where Jesus would have been carrying the cross, or where Simon of Cyrene was compelled to carry the cross for Jesus, who's part of the way. This would have been the path that Jesus walked on the road to Calvary, on the road to crucifixion. Here's a picture of us carrying the cross in front of the Simon of Cyrene church. This is one of the stations. When people pray the Stations of the Cross, these are the actual stations. The next photo, my mother-in-law following our tour guide as she's carrying the cross. We would stop at the different places the Bible speaks of, and we'd offer a prayer. And this is the actual Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which again, I think it's 6 different Christian denominations, most notably Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic, which they fight over. And this is inside, this is underneath the altar. This very well could have been the tomb, Joseph of Arimathea. It was very, very moving, just a little light inside there. So people in those days were buried inside caves. And you put a rock inside of the cave. This is inside the Greek Orthodox part of the church, looking up at that oculus there, and we had monks and priests singing. This is a piece of the wood which the Orthodox claim was part of the original cross. Whether or not you believe that is one thing, but it was pretty powerful to touch. The monuments, I must say, were pretty interesting, the architecture and the art. But what to me as a person, as a pilgrim, was most interesting is to be in the place where these things actually happened, And I could show you a million other photos. If you want, I will. But this is what I have, and I hope you've enjoyed this little tour through Israel. God bless, and we'll pray for the people of the Holy Land.